I took my studio from this to this. You may have been watching my reels, which I've posted about the studio updates with the build progress. But today I wanted to talk a bit about the behind the scenes, so the planning and the organization for how this actually came about. It took a lot longer than it seemed like in the videos. The videos aired over about a week, and it actually took me probably about a month for this whole process. So I started off actually purchasing materials. So I bought a bunch of the wood, all the framing timber and stuff that went into the walls. Probably about a month before I actually started building, and I was probably doing planning for a couple of weeks before then. So I drew up plans using some cool tools to help me with the acoustic simulations. Amrock is one of them, very cool, and there's a couple other acoustic simulators or absorption calculators which are worth checking out. I'll put them up here or post them in the links below. But they're well worth checking out if you plan on doing this for yourself. It's always better to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Following that up, I drew out a bunch of the plans for this whole studio build. So I had how much I was going to put in each of the walls, if I was going to have air gap, where I was going to have an air gap, and drew out all the plans. Unfortunately, they got changed a bit once I started taking the ceiling off and the walls off, which I wasn't planning on doing. The ceiling I was kind of expecting, so that was fine. But the walls were definitely a surprise, so had to make some adjustments with that, but it actually worked out quite well in my favor because I just gained space in the walls, and that way I could just go a little bit deeper in. There's no air gap in there, but it was better for me to have the extra space inside of the studio so I can fit a few people in here. It's not the biggest space, but sometimes I need to fit 3-4 people in here, and I wanted to make sure I could do that easily. And if it was going to be much smaller, it probably would have only fit maybe 2, maybe 3 people maximum at any point in time. So the extra space was really beneficial. Same with the wall behind the camera there. And the only actual wall with an air gap is the wall behind me here, which is the front wall, which is about 32 centimeters of material, insulation, rock wool, and about a 9 centimeter air gap. Whereas the rest of it is just what would have been the air gap and then framing timber, and I filled the whole space with the insulation just because you get more out of it if you have full insulation in there rather than an air gap as well. And I didn't want to make the insulation thinner and then add the air gap when it's more beneficial to have more insulation. So we might change something. I might bring it further out in the future, but for now and for my situation at the moment, this is how it's going to work better for me. So there was that. In terms of insulation and materials outside of the framing timber, I already had a bunch of the insulation from previous studio panels, which I had in a previous studio setup before I moved here, and most of it I've just cannibalized and used for this build. So most of that's in the front wall there, and I had some panels from a friend who did a studio build, which he didn't need the extra, so he was giving them away, so I took him up on that, and I held on to it for probably I want to say a couple of years before I ended up using them. But that's all in the roof, which is a slightly denser material, so it's better absorption for the ceiling because you don't want to go as thick in the ceiling generally. So it's a bit thinner but a bit denser, so it works really well for that purpose. And then I had to purchase some extra materials, so I ended up going. The stuff in the ceiling is pink bats, and the stuff that I had left over was Nauf. I bought some more Nauf panels insulation from the supplier here in New Zealand, and it was the closest thing I could get to what everything else I already had was. So went for the highest density and as much thickness as I could manage. Because the highest densities available from most retailers aren't super dense. You can get higher densities and heavier rock walls or glass walls from other places, which can be a good thing, but density isn't everything you need to think about. So I highly recommend you check out the calculators and stuff just to make sure you're doing right by the studio and not just going for the densest materials to try make it the most effective, because it won't necessarily make it the most effective. It could do, but it won't always, depending on what your situation is and what you're planning on using it for. Following up that, the material, I bought basically the cheapest material I could find. This is just kind of the underlay. I'll probably do another layer over the top of it with a prettier fabric. This is all just stapled in at the moment, so nothing special going on there. I'll probably get fabric tracks and nicer fabric for the next layer, but I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do yet, and I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to leave this window here. So there's a window behind that as well, which I'm partially blocking off at the moment, just because I was getting a bit of a flutter echo since I put up this TV screen in here. And so you really kind of need to take into consideration all of the reflective surfaces or lack of reflective surfaces. Putting the TV in's actually being kind of nice because there's some diffusion happening from it. It's not ideal because it is a very large flat surface, and with the other windows it's definitely had a bit of an interaction. But blocking up that window behind the camera has made a bit of a difference in terms of eliminating the flutter echo that was happening there briefly. So that's good to know. I like having this one open just because you do get a bit of natural light. We'll see if it stays this way. It might be more beneficial for me to block that off and just fill it up with treatment. We'll see how it goes, but everything is measuring pretty well at the moment, so I'm not mad about it, but it might be better to cover it up in the long run. But it's still a bit of experimentation going on, even though most of the build is finished. In terms of new additions, I might end up adding some more diffusion along the front here. Obviously, we're going to make it look a little prettier in here once I get the chance, but I need to wait on some extra funds and materials for that. And then also combining this rack unit here with this disc here. Not going to be these two going together, but I'll probably make a disc or purchase a disc that has rack units built into it, so it's all on one, and I don't have to weirdly offset the disc like it is at the moment just to fit the rack unit in here. So the rack units I might keep, but they'll probably be moved. But in the meantime, I want to get a disc that's all-inclusive, so everything can be right in front of me and I can access it whenever I need. It also gives me a little bit extra space for more hardware, which I hope to be getting in the future. And yeah, then it will be a very nice setup in here. But for now, that's the plans for additions in the future. And I'll probably do some lighting and stuff, maybe some LEDs. Make it look pretty for everyone watching. But yeah, that's pretty much the build.